Greetings, everyone in Lukeman Nation. Welcome to your monthly dose of Blackonomically speaking in Lukeman Nation. If you're watching on Black Power Media, you're watching Lukeman Nation, the most dangerous show on Black Power Media, on the most dangerous platform that is Black Power Media. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Friday, y'all. Really happy. It is Friday. It's been a long week. I don't know about you, but it's been a week for me. So really excited that this week has come to an end and I can frolic and do some artsy craftsy things a little bit later on and do some outside, what do I want to call it? Hanging out with some comrades celebrating the Sandinista revolution, the successful Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua. Since I cannot go to Nicaragua this year to celebrate, there's a celebration here in Washington, D.C., so I'm gonna attend that and hang out with some of the comrades in solidarity with the Sandinista victory. And let's see, then there's Sunday, so then there's church worship, church stuff. And then Monday, I finally get to do the procedure that I've been trying to schedule for a doggone year, this kidney biopsy. So glad that that hurdle is about to be hopped over. Woo, it's been a stretch, y'all. So let's all breathe and relax, because we're going to have a good time tonight talking about economics from a Black perspective, of course. But before we get into it, as always, if you're watching on Black Power Media, you should subscribe to Black Power Media. Click the notification bell so you can make sure to get notified when anyone and everyone goes live, posts content, uploads video on this channel. Plenty for everyone. You can support Black Power Media on patreon.com/Black Power Media. There you can find some merch. We got Black Power Media merch. You can also support Lukeman Nation on Patreon, patreon.com/Lukeman Nation, LUQMANNATION. Appreciate all of your support, whichever one you choose. We ain't in competition. We are in this struggle together. So, let's get right to it, because there's been so much financial foolishness, chicanery, tomfoolery going on in these Black capitalist streets. It's been ridiculous. And of course, all this week, probably, and all today, particularly, we here on Black Power Media have been talking about this ridiculous thing called Invest Fest. And, it's one thing for us regular anti-capitalists to have a perspective on that foolishness, but I wanted to get the perspective of a professional in the area of economics, and there is no better person to do that than our friend and comrade, Dr. Linwood Tauheed, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Welcome back, my friend, Doctor. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
You're looking great.
Thank you. Good to see you as well. Hope you're doing well.
I am doing really well. And before we even get started, I want to make sure that you see that people are really appreciative of your work, your contributions. Really excited that you join us once a month to talk all things economics. Okay, so yeah, let's just get to it because I don't. Lord have mercy, help us. This thing called Invest Fest, and let me go back to the main page here for this. Whoops, there we go. Make sure I share the right page. Um, get my mouse straight. Here we go. This foolishness. Okay, let me stop. Let me stop editorializing. There is something happening the weekend of August 5th through the 7th, during the month of Black August, no less. Oh,
Hmm.
called Invest Fest 2022. And these are all of the people who are involved in this event. And for people who are just hearing about it, um, they say that Invest Fest will be a first of its kind in person experience to combine investing, entrepreneurship, pop culture, ooh, alarm bells, and entertainment, more alarm bells, in a festival setting. Oh, these are the topics they say they will discuss: how to get money from the government, not a bad thing, taxes, this right here, oh my God, oh no, no. That too, also, real estate, insurance, estate planning. These are, not necessarily bad things, pretty important. Marketing, what the devil? But here is the thing that really freaks me out about this thing. These are the ticket prices, Dr. Tauhid. For
Yes.
regular folks, for general admission, just to have access for Saturday and Sunday, the pre-sale, $250 a ticket. I
Hmm.
guess if you show up on that day on Saturday, $750. InvestFest Silver VIP membership pre-sale, $1,500. That gives you access to Friday, Saturday, Sunday with preferred seating. But I thought we were all learning how to be. Why is there preferred? Then there's the gold VIP membership that I guess is even more preferred seating than the silver, 10
Hmm.
grand. If you show up at the door, the prices that are crossed out are the prices that you will pay when you show up that day. Invest Best VIP lifetime membership. I have my opinions as a non economist, but you are a professor of economics and an expert in such matters. Please tell us your thoughts.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert apparently in how to price tickets for events. This seems a bit rich, but I suppose if you have the money to quote invest, we'll talk about that. And if you want to rub shoulders with Steve Harvey and Charlemagne the God and other folks and get the backstage pass and so forth, I suppose you can afford it. I'm not saying it's worth it, but I suppose you can afford it. We don't. There's an old axiom that you get what you pay for. Yeah, you never get more than you pay for. Sometimes you get a lot less. So now those items that are on that list, things like real estate, entrepreneurship. If someone is interested in buying houses as an investment, I think they should probably, if you can do that, it's a good idea. I don't discourage anyone from doing that or starting a business. I was a former entrepreneur. Uh, 10 years I owned a software development company. I will probably be an entrepreneur again. And so, if you have something, a business, a skill that you can make an income from, I suggest you do that. Uh, how to get money from the government was something that shows up a lot in social media. I look at that as kind of a scam. Along with crypto, we've talked about crypto a couple of times, and we talked about crypto on this program before crypto began crashing.
Yes, yes, we did.
Yeah,
And what did you say then about crypto?
I said it's a Ponzi scheme, and all Ponzi schemes come to an end. And so we're seeing that now. Now, there may be there's a story this week that some senator, I believe it was a senator, is proposing allowing these crypto firms to have access to Federal Reserve assets. That is to now. What that means is if you're a crypto firm and you have so much value on the books, and the value of your company is declining, then if you can make an argument to the Federal Reserve that if your too big to fail company fails, it will cause a problem in the larger economy, then perhaps the Fed can bail you out like it bailed out Goldman Sachs and other entities during the 2008 crisis. My take on that is I think fairly original. I look at the problems that were created in 2008 by the financial institutions as kind of a monopoly game being cashed in for real money. These financial institutions were making up things called derivatives, saying that they had some value. They actually had no value. If they had all crashed, then no one would have lost any money out in the real world. But they were able to convince the Federal Reserve that it was real money, and the Federal Reserve bought their troubled assets. You remember the Troubled Asset Recovery Program, TARP, for real money. And if Bitcoin can convince the Federal Reserve that there actually is $1 trillion of value in Bitcoin, and the Federal Reserve needs to bail them out, then the Federal Reserve can be in on the Ponzi scheme and bail them out. What that means, of course, is that we've turned monopoly money into real money again. But these things, these scams, when they come around, particularly if they can get as far as money from the Fed, they try to come around again. So that's what I'm expecting next. I'm expecting the Bitcoin coin and the Dogecoin and all these other crypto folks to say we're too big to fail. If we fail, the economy will fail, and then they'll be bailed out. Now, if that's the case, then it's the culmination of a Ponzi scheme turned into the government. The Federal Reserve will be the financier of the Ponzi scheme. The problem with crypto in general is that if you've got $1 million of money, real money that came into crypto, how does it increase in value? What does it produce in the economy that actually increases value? Real estate would, but it's not investing in real estate. You're investing in crypto. It's like taking $1 and locking it up in a vault and coming back tomorrow and expecting that there'll be $2 there. Well, what money doesn't reproduce itself that way, and value
Mm.
doesn't. So it's what Karl Marx, the extra value that gets added to something like money, crypto. Karl Marx called fictitious capital. It doesn't really exist except up here. The first ones in and the first ones out get to take the million, and the rest are left holding the bag.
Mm. So you started saying, making a comment about the getting money from the government.
Mm-hmm.
What what's the issue with that? Because we hear that all the time. The government has all this money that is just given out, and you just don't know
Mm-hmm.
how to get it.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that? What's the value in that?
Well, if there are legitimate ways for people to get money, for example, there are scholarships for various uh, occupations that people can go in that have money attached to them, grants and so forth. If someone can point you to that, so you can get a scholarship or a fellowship, or some money to renovate your house, some hot weather renovation and so forth. The kind of things that usually happen at a local level, not necessarily a government level. If people can point you to that, that's a good thing. There are agencies that are supposed to be doing that are not doing a good job of it. But if someone can point you to that, of course, they want a fee for doing that. And as long as the fee is not too exorbitant, as long as you get more out of it than you have to pay for it, there's no problem with that. But some of this is just scams as well. So you have to be very careful. It's like the author that says, "I'll show you how to make $1 million. Send me $10 and I'll give you the information." So 100,000 people, want that information, then the person has made his million. So that's how you make your million. Have people call, send $10 to you for information. So if we getting real value or not? Real estate is obviously a hot thing. Real estate prices are going up. I suspect we're in somewhat of a bubble. And so it's like the flipping phenomena that occurred. If you got in early, bought your house, and were able to flip it before housing values crashed, and you made money. But eventually, all bubbles are going to collapse. It's a matter of timing. Everyone thinks they're in early and out will get out early, but everyone can't get in early and out early. The late ones are late and they get out late. Real estate, taxes. We certainly need help with taxes and deductions and so forth. I'm not so sure that you can't get good advice at H&R Block, better advice, for a lot less than you're being charged. So some of these things are probably okay. Some are not. Some are a wash. The worst thing on that list, I think, was probably crypto, but that's my pet peeve.
Yeah, I'm looking at this little list again, and the fact that these folks are charging people the ridiculous amounts of money that they're charging people, regular folks, particularly black folks, because this event is clearly geared toward black people, charging your regular average black person $250 to learn about insurance, and the fact that, okay, we all need an insurance policy, some kind of insurance. If it's not life insurance, then it needs to be at least burial insurance. You don't need to pay anybody tip $250 to tell you that. I just told you for free. There you go. That's what you need to know about it.
Well, $250, I think, is not out of line. It's the other items that
Mhm.
are thousands of dollars. I don't get a $10,000 InvestFest Gold VIP membership. But if you've got the $10,000 to spend and you want to go backstage and private party, this is a social event. It's like going to the Academy Awards, I guess, or some other social event, and $10,000 is for some people is not out of reach. For most people, it is, of course.
And that's the thing, like what you just said, that these gold and VIP lifetime membership levels, you know, even the silver membership, they include a VIP private networking event, a fireside chat. What the heck is that? um, a private dinner with EYL and friends, a VIP at the official after party,
Mhm.
emerged. Look, if I'm paying these people $250, the least you could do is throw in some t-shirts, some mugs, and some bags. And for $250,
Mhm.
yeah, I shouldn't have to pay 10 grand for that. And then I guess the lifetime membership includes all of that, private networking, all of that. And I just feel like it is those particular levels. This is such a scam because it is marketing something, what's the word I'm looking for, exclusive
Hmm.
for people who already have the money to buy that exclusivity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which is supposed to give them more access to more information that everybody else who's paying
Mm.
either 250 or 750 are supposed to be paying to get,
Yeah.
but they're not, which is capitalism. That's the entire problem with
Mhm.
capitalism and the whole investor asset class in general. It's that the people who can get in early and have the information about all of this stuff and the money to just throw away on risky
Mhm.
investments that may or may not work out, and they can get out at least with their initial investment if things go south. That's how the rich are rich in the
Mhm.
first place.
Mhm.
That is not going to make anybody who doesn't already have that kind of money
Yeah.
buy that kind of access as
Mhm.
rich as those folks. And Dr. Tawheed, why do we not see this?
Well, I suspect if you have $10,000 for a ticket, you probably don't need any of the advice that is going to be given there. So what you're paying for is access to stars, to celebrities, who are of course being paid. They're not doing this for nothing. If you've got 250 and you want to go, you may get 250 worth of advice. On the other hand, you're not going to get to rub shoulders. You'll get the wave at the celebrities across the room, and maybe that's enough. But we are certainly in celebrity culture. That when crypto began falling, I remember a story about Matt Damon was a big influencer or promoter of crypto, and once his crypto, I forget which one it was, began to fall, nobody could find him. He was completely silent.
Completely MIA.
Right, and I bet he got out.
Commercials gone and everything.
I bet he got out early and didn't lose a dime. Probably made money, before it crashed.
I got
But
to tell you, if I'm paying $10,000
mhm.
for anything, for access to any human being, for anything, let me tell you what that person is fitting to do for my 10 grand. They're gonna come to this house and do everything I tell them to. They're gonna paint. They
Right.
gonna cut the grass. They're gonna be washing my dishes and doing the laundry. I may even request a foot massage for 10 grand for access to a human being. Get out of here.
Yeah.
No.
But this is again, capitalism at its best in terms of the promotion of celebrities to levels that were unimaginable in terms of income. I mean, our athletes are being paid, hundreds of millions of dollars. At one point, certainly in my lifetime, they weren't not in that stratosphere like that. Now, I would say that athletes who are getting that are deserving. I'll use that term of that because they're getting a part of the gate. The owners are getting very wealthy and they're getting their small part. So I don't begrudge them for getting as much as they can from the owners. The problem is then a ticket becomes $10,000 because everybody is wanting to get their millions in the deal,
Right.
and
Right.
so that causes inflation.
Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not trying to pay people $10,000 to make them come to my house and exploit them for their labor. That's not. I'm just making a point.
Yeah,
Yo, there is nobody so famous that I need to pay them $10,000 for me to have access to them. You ain't that special. That nobody is that
yeah,
special.
right.
So you just mentioned inflation, and this I think is a good segue to the discussion about inflation and black people, because
Right.
the reason the black investor class, which it's weird saying that because even these black folks who really have made money
Hmm.
off of, as you said, getting paid by corporations to push this nonsense to people in this country who have so little
Hmm.
in order to survive. They really can't call themselves wealthy. They're not as wealthy as the people who are paying them to
Yeah.
lie to us and
Hmm.
rip us off, right?
Hmm.
And the reality is that inflation, in addition to capitalism all by itself, the in the normal, regular, everyday operation of capitalism, has Black people in particular at an economic disadvantage, always
Hmm.
has. And
Hmm.
we've talked about that on this show many times. But now that I guess the politicians are finally admitting that we're about to enter a recession if we're not in it already, after economists like yourself have said it's coming and we're
Hmm.
probably already in it.
Right.
What does inflation mean now for Black people who are already at the bottom economically?
Well, inflation, has myriad effects. Now, the typical way of thinking about the bad effect of inflation is to talk about what it does to bankers, right? That when someone borrows money at a certain interest rate, and inflation comes along and it goes past the interest rate, then when they pay that money back, the banker is hurt because they get less money back than in the loan originally. Yeah, that does happen, but it is not just bankers that are hurt by inflation. That story is almost put out there to act as if to make this point that the rich are hurt by inflation, the poor are going to be okay. And so there's no still discussion of the harm that inflation does to the poor. For example, persons who are on fixed income, prices of things go up and they can't buy them, so they have to make choices. People have to buy ration of their medication or their food, or go without utilities for a while because the price of things have gone up. They are not only hurt in terms of getting less money back, they may be hurt, and there may be loss of life through starvation or other kinds of mismedication and so forth that can cause exacerbation of illnesses. And so the poor are at existential risk from
Mm.
inflation, where the rich just lose a little money, you know. And so we have to talk about the effects of inflation on the poor, and it's something that we're beginning to talk about. But in the past, there's not been that kind of concern. Even persons, if 60%, if I have the right number, 60%, there are 60% of African Americans on Social Security have Social Security. Social Security is at least 90% of their income. Many is 100% of their income. And Social Security is indexed to inflation. So the last for this year, because of the inflation of last year, there was an increase of about 6% in Social Security payments. And some people say, well, that protects persons on Social Security, because if inflation now is 9%. If it averages the 10, 12% this year, there should be an increase in Social Security benefits next year. But the problem is, of course, the inflation is now. Your extra money doesn't come till next year, you know. And so there are persons who are on fixed income, fixed this year, who are going to suffer from inflation. And there are persons who are working, the working poor, who need to get to work by transportation. Gas prices are going up, and so transportation prices are going up. People can buy less gas in places in which you don't have a very robust public transportation system. It may become impossible for someone to get to their job or to get there regularly, which puts them in danger of losing that income completely. And so one way of thinking about, okay, the Fed also, the Federal Reserve, of course, increases interest rates to address inflation. to try to bring inflation down. I think we did talk about this last time, is that the Fed increasing interest rates to bring down inflation is directed at curing inflation by decreasing the demand for goods and services. And so if the demand for goods and services decreases, then the prices of those goods and services will also decrease. The problem is that a side effect, it's not an unintended side effect, we know this is going to happen, is that it moves the economy into recession. People begin to lose their jobs. And so, there's one of my colleagues has mentioned recently that that he would rather have a job at 9% inflation than be unemployed at 2% inflation. So for if your choice, if the effect of the Fed raising rates is to make you unemployed, well, inflation may come down, but you're in much worse condition than you've had. The Federal Reserve has a mandate to do those two things, to control inflation, but also to have maximum employment. Those are two mandates that come from, I think it was 1978, was called the Humphrey-Hawkins Bill. Hubert Humphrey and Augustus Hawkins, Democratic congressman from, I believe, Georgia, sponsored a bill, and it got passed, giving the Fed the additional mandate of full employment. But those two things are contradictory. When the Fed does, the only thing it can do is manipulate interest rates and raises interest rates. A recession comes about, people are unemployed, and there's nothing the Fed can do about that, except lower interest rates and bring inflation back. And so if we're entering into a 1970s stagflation situation where we have high inflation and also high unemployment, we have the worst of all possible worlds. And the poor are the ones who suffer the most in that. And we're not just talking about the poor in the US, we're talking about poor around the world. There are protests going on around the world in developing countries and in so-called developed countries, where people are protesting the high the inflation in prices in various things. And so inflation is a big problem, and the Federal Reserve Bank is not the place to do that, particularly now since we don't have a demand problem, we have a supply problem. Mm-hmm. There's not enough stuff out there, and there's not enough things being produced, and we need to get on into the process of increasing the supply of goods and services, as opposed to trying to decrease the demand for goods and services, which is the wrong thing to do, but it's the only thing that the Fed can do.
Wow. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat as I'm thinking. The only thing the U.S. produces now is war, militarism, and crypto Ponzi schemes. That's it. Mm-hmm. So we got a comment that I would love to get your thoughts on. Holly, the Exalted Empress, fantastic name, says paying back the stimulus with interest. Is that true? Is that the way, inflation is kind of being framed, at least by politicians and political economists?
Yeah, well, I don't know about political economists, but politicians certainly are framing it that way, particularly conservative politicians who are arguing that it was the stimulus money that was sent out to persons during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic. During the height of the pandemic that caused the inflation. And I don't disagree with the idea that the money that was sent out initially caused some inflation. There was actually what we call deflation during the pandemic recession, which lasted, a couple of quarters. Economic activity went down, and the prices of things went down as much as 2 or 3%. And so when you start to recover, prices go up, and you start to have inflation for at least a period of time. And that would have lasted with the stimulus packages, that would have lasted for a while. But once that money is spent, it's not continuing to be spent. And so that inflation would have been transitory. And, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, was saying, this is transitory, it's going to pass, it's going to pass. But we had other things that caused the continuation of this inflation that are not the initial spending. We have climate change, and climate
Mm-hmm.
change is causing the failure of crop harvests around the world and in the U.S., particularly in the Midwest. There's less and less food able in terms of the harvest, which increases the price of food. That had nothing to do with the initial spending, right? We have pandemic that's continuing on. People are still not working as much as they want to work. The unemployment rate we've said is at 3.6%. It's been at that level for months, but that number is deceptive because to be first of all to be employed is to have made any amount of income in the last 2 weeks. Now, this is what the way this is done is that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does about a 50 to 60,000 phone survey ongoing, right, every 2 weeks. And they call people and they ask a series of questions. And one of the first questions they ask is, have you earned any income in the last 2 weeks? And if you say yes, I worked for Uber last week. I picked up a passenger. I made $10. You are employed.
Wow.
So you're not counted in the unemployment rate. You are employed, right? People think that to be employed means to work 40 hours a week.
That's what
Well,
I was under the impression.
and when the unemployment statistics were first generated, most people who were working full time. But since we've gone into this gig economy, which was exacerbated by the pandemic, people are finding that they can't find full time work, and there are other reasons that full time work is becoming more abundant than excuse me, it's becoming less abundant. But people are not able to find full time work. But if you work 1 hour in the last 2 weeks, you were employed, so you're not in the unemployment number. And so to be unemployed, you have to have made zero income in the last 2 weeks, and you have to have been looking for a job. And so then you're unemployed. Well, if you're actually underemployed, right? You're in that number that made $1, in the last 2 weeks, and you're employed. Then that unemployment number doesn't reflect the fact that you can't find full time work. So there's a lot of part-time workers out there that are not included in the unemployment figure. So that number is deceptive. It underestimates the number of people who are working less than they want to or need to.
Wow.
And there's as I'm thinking about this, when the Affordable Care Act was put into place, what we call Obamacare, one of the stipulations was for small businesses, well, businesses that were actually more than small business, and that number is 500. If you have a business that employs 500, fewer than 500 people, you're a small business. Now, I don't consider that a small business,
Yeah, no.
But if you're over 500, like an Amazon, for example,
Mm-hmm.
if your workers are full time, you have to provide health insurance for them. But if they're not full time, then you don't. So Amazon has a cap on the general number of hours that workers work. If I remember, it's somewhere around 32 hours, whatever the ACA number is that above which you're considered full time.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon capped their number of workers at that, so they don't have to pay them full time benefits, in benefits of any kind, because most of them are not working full time. And many companies went to that scheme of having their workers work part time so that they can reduce the cost of their benefits. So the ACA actually increased the percentage of part time work in
Wow.
the labor force. And again, now we have workers who are working fewer than 40 hours a week. They want to work 40, they're working less than 40. The unemployment rate goes down, but it's really an underemployment that needs to be addressed. So there's manipulation in that process of those numbers. Those numbers don't mean what they used to mean.
Ooh, man, I knew they were manipulated, but I did not realize how deeply. Or another great question. Ricky Ryan asked. She pointed out that Richard Wolff talked about how Nixon handled inflation
Yeah.
by not allowing anyone to raise any prices.
Mhm.
What is the issue with the Biden administration taking that route, or why won't the Biden administration take that route?
Because Joe Biden is more conservative than Richard Nixon.
Oh, oh, oh,
Joe Biden
oh,
is to the right of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, as a
ooh,
Republican, was actually a fairly liberal person. I mean, Richard Nixon started the Small Business Administration.
he did.
There are black minority set aside programs in the SBA that Richard Nixon started. And so yeah, Richard Nixon put in price controls. They worked. Now, of course, the inflation during the Nixon administration, a big part of that was the Vietnam War.
Mm,
We're making more and more weaponry. That weaponry is being made in the U.S. People who work in those weapons factories are being paid, and they're going out to buy a loaf of bread, right? Well, they're not. The amount of bread is not increasing, and the weapons that they're producing are being shipped off to Vietnam. So you can't go down to your local store and buy a howitzer, round. And so there is an increase in demand, but no increase in supply, and that caused inflation from the Vietnam War. But Nixon was smart enough to say, we're going to put in price controls, and it worked until the inflation that would have been there dissipated after the war ended and so forth. And so there was no more need for that. But Joe Biden is, that putting in price controls is anti-free market.
mm,
And
mm,
Joe Biden is all for free markets. He's
hmm.
he's more conservative than Richard Nixon.
And that's saying a lot, and not in a good way
No.
at all. So here's another question, and I honestly, this is something I've never heard of, but I hope you
Yeah.
can answer the question. Ask the comrade about the inverted yield curve. What is that?
Yeah, I've not been following that. It's a good question. I've not been following that recently. There was some stories about the yield curve inverting about a month ago. Now, what the yield curve is this: the government has a number of bonds that it sells that come to maturity at different times. So you can buy a 2-year bond. You buy a bond, and in 2 years you get the interest that you're supposed to get on that bond. But there's also a 10-year bond. You buy a bond and you're intending to hold it for 10 years. If you sell it before 10 years, there's a penalty. So it matures in 10 years.
Mhm.
And each of those bonds are the prices of those bonds are based on risk. Now, let me see if I can explain it this way. A bond that has a face value of $100, right? That pays an interest of 5%. You may buy that bond. You may have to pay $105 for that bond if the bond is in demand, or if it's less in demand, you can buy it for $95, right? If you pay more than $100, the 5% is not actually 5%, it's less than 5% you get back. But if you buy it for less than $100, you're actually getting the 5% is actually more than 5% of $95. And so what gets adjusted with bonds is not the face value of the bond. I mean, not the interest rate on the bond, it's the face value, it's the sell value of the bond. The face value is the same. And so when people buy 10-year bonds, generally they're buying a bond that is less risky than a 2-year bond. With the US government, okay, what's going to happen in the next 2 years? I don't know. Republicans take control of Congress, and Joe Biden is a lame duck for 2 years. And but in 10 years, we might think that things will be less risky, less volatile. So usually 10-year bonds return a operational less interest than 2-year bonds. 2-year bonds are more risky. You get more of an interest return on it, right? And so the yield curve in this case between the 2-year and the 10-year bond is the relationship between the interest on the 10-year bond and the 2-year bond. And generally, the interest on the 10-year bond is supposed to be lower than the interest on the 2-year bond. The yield curve being reversed means that the interest on the 10-year bond is higher than the interest on the 2-year bond, which means that people are more worried about what's going to happen in the next 2 years, in 10 years than they are in the next 2 years. That means people are really worried about the continuity of this government.
Well, they should be worried about what happens in the next 10 years because it better be socialism. I'm just saying.
Well, 2 years, climate change will be it won't be perhaps much different than it is now. In 10 years, we may be in real trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So 10 years is more risky than 2 years. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And so the yield, the interest paid, is inverted. The interest on the 10-year bond is actually higher than the interest on the 2-year bond.
Wow, fantastic. Okay, one last question about the current inflation, and then we're going to talk about what keeps the other thing that keeps poor Black people poor, that is not actually what we think it is. And that's this question from Leah Boggs, and a couple of people have asked this question: where does price gouging fit into the supply chain problem we're seeing? We know all companies are price gouging. However, is that what's happening across all industries?
Yes, I think it is happening across all industries. Can I say something to finish the yield curve thing?
Yes.
Just a couple before I do that. Whenever the yield curve has inverted in the past, that has been followed by a recession. So the yield curve inverting is considered an indication of recession, right? Okay. Wow. So with this thing about price gouging, here's a simple example. I don't have a board to write this on, so make the numbers friendly. Let's say someone the normal price for a bottle of water is $1. And the seller, the store that sells that bottle of water, buys it for 50 cents. So they buy a 50-cent bottle of water, they sell to the public for $1. That's a 100% profit, 50 cents profit on 50-cent cost, right? Let's say the supply of bottled water goes down, and so the price of bottled water goes up to the seller, right? They have to buy that bottle of water for $1. And if they use their regular markup of 100%, now they're getting $1 profit on that bottle. So that bottle sells for $2. So whereas they were making 50 cents a bottle before, they're making $1 a bottle now, right? Now, the question is that extra 50 cents that they're making justified in the pricing? Because they're selling the same amount of water, maybe a little less, but they're actually making more profit. That profit is called a windfall profit. The term windfall happens when you're walking out in the apple orchard and the wind blows an apple off the ground, off the tree. It falls to the ground. That's an apple that you can pick up without doing any work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a windfall. And so this seller of bottled water makes an extra 50 cents per bottle without doing any work. And some, I would argue that their prices should be capped, as Richard Nixon did, to the original 50 cents that they made on a bottle of water, which means that if the bottle of water goes up to $1 for them, they should have to sell it for $1.50. They make the same 50 cents, not the extra 50 that is a windfall. But you do that by either making price caps, or you create what Bernie Sanders is trying to do as a windfall profit tax, is to tax that extra 50 cents away.
I love that comment. The water isn't 50 cents more refreshing or hydrating, but the price keeps going up. I see you all's questions.
That's why it's unfair, actually.
I see you all's questions about supply chain, supply and demand, and all this kind of stuff. And Man, you all ask the best questions, and I hate that we just
They
don't
do.
have. I would love for, honestly, I would love to do this every week, but I don't want to press people for their time, and y'all know what my schedule is like, so don't make me just. but but this is why I love these conversations, because in everything that we talk about regarding money, finance, and economics, particularly among oppressed people in this country, specifically Black people and poor Black people, there's so much focus on shaming behavior,
Mhm.
or correcting frivolous or irresponsible behavior. Like
Right.
everything we talk about every week, every month, rather, we're always talking about how capitalism itself, and particularly the political manipulation of economics, really keeps Black people, oppressed people, and especially poor people
Hmm.
at the bottom intentionally.
Right.
That there is the system is literally designed to keep a class of people exploited so that other people can stay rich, right?
Yeah, this is kind of to finish off the discussion, because
Hmm.
the extra price gouging, the windfall profits, of course, doesn't only happen in bottled water, but it does happen in bottled water. With the hurricanes, with Katrina, and other kinds of
Uh-huh.
disasters. If government officials will intervene on that, telling people you can't sell that water at in price gouge. But this is happening with gasoline. It's happening with housing. It's happening with rental. It's happening with other kinds of things. And inflation gives price gougers a something to hide behind when they raise their prices. They can say, "I'm doing what everyone else is doing. This is just inflation." And in fact, what they're doing is causing inflation. Toilet paper too, essentials. And there's an article that you sent to me, talking about how inflation affects Black folks more than whites. It affects poor folks more than wealthy,
Hmm.
because if you are if you're a minimum wage worker, you have a fixed income, you're in retirement. We find that the greater increases in prices comes at the in those items that are the most in demand, that like toilet paper and water, and so you or gasoline. These prices go up more than the price of a yacht. The price of a yacht probably hasn't gone up at all, because there were, if you have to ask the price, you can't afford it, so the
Right.
the price doesn't matter for luxury goods. Luxury goods rarely get inflated, but necessary goods have price inflation more so, and so the poor who have to buy necessary goods, that's why they're necessary, get hit by inflation more than others.
Yeah, the article that you were talking about actually mentions also the next topic that we're gonna talk about. And I just kind of stumbled upon this blog as I was
Mhm.
kind of researching what I wanted to maybe talk about with you this week, and it's called Liberty Street Economic. It's from Economics. It's from the
Mhm.
Federal Reserve Bank of New York. I mean, so the blog is from the Fed.
Right.
So I mean, they're telling us that they know that
Yeah.
the rise in inflation
Mhm.
it has not hit people equitably.
Right.
But these are the
Yeah.
same people who are making the policy.
Yeah. The Federal Reserve around the country, the Federal Reserve of Kansas City, Federal Reserve in St. Louis, the Fed in Denver. These various Feds surprisingly put out reports that are actually show an interest in understanding what's happening with poor people. Now, these are analysts for the Fed. These are not the policy makers for the Fed.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're putting out this information, and to the Fed's credit, they allow it to be published under their names. But the leaders of the Fed in addressing inflation, as we said before, they've only got one tool.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they can do something else. even if they think they should do something else, because there's not total agreement on whether or not raising interest rates is the way to go among the Fed. But if you're on the Fed and you make a policy, it's you have a hammer. It doesn't matter what the problem is. You've only got a hammer, and so you use that hammer. But the Fed itself, I've found to be fairly. I don't want to use the word progressive, but fairly informative in terms of the kind of work that their researchers do. And this is an article that is doing good research. If you go down to the bottom of the article, as I get down to the bottom of the article, my continuous disappointment with the Fed came into view. If you continue to go down to the very bottom, the Fed, they go back to the pictures. The Fed has very few black economists. and so,
Yeah.
and so it's good to see that these three young economists are economic researchers are doing work on the poor and on quote minorities. But the Fed has a problem in terms of the kind of people who work for them.
That's true. Even
Mhm.
as they do point out things that dispute these notions of financial irresponsibility, personal lack
Right.
of what's that? Lack of personal responsibility,
Mhm.
frivolous spending that we always
Right.
hear about poor Black people and believe
Mhm.
ourselves about poor Black people,
Right.
which circling around to Invest Fest,
Yes, exactly.
I guarantee you, every single person who speaks is going to be talking about, the reason we don't have any money is because we spend it all on Jordans.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that guy who's in prison. Oh, he was out. Bill Cosby, is that his name? Kind of reminds me of his pound cake speak where he says,
Uh-huh.
"Well, the lower class people have let us down." Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It's
And
talking to a group of upper middle class and upper class black folks at an NAACP convention, pointing the
right,
finger at the non-leadership for our problems. Yeah.
right. So in Invest Fest, you got a bunch of Black people who are paid by corporations and corporate entities that are run by mostly white people
Hmm.
to disparage poor Black people and
Hmm.
other poor people, but Black people in particular,
Hmm.
to a group of mostly Black people who can afford to give these folks 250, 750, five,
ten
ten
thousand.
thousand dollars
Right.
to hear poor Black folks disparaged, when the truth is, according to these non-Black folks at the Fed of New York,
Right.
according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and their annual Consumer Expenditure Survey. And this survey allows one to see how different demographic groups allocate their spending to different categories. They say that in 2019, the CEX shows that Black Americans spend relatively more
Hmm.
on transportation and housing
Right.
and relatively less on food and entertainment than white Americans do.
Right.
Now, because I love to back up my opinions with data, understanding that this is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Oops, sorry about that. That's the wrong one. We we take this with the grain of salt that is required, but they do provide the data that confirms this. So
Hmm.
this is actually the 2020 CEX.
Hmm.
So I went current. This is the consumer expenditures for 2020. And there are a bunch of charts all the way down, but I'm going to go all the way down
Hmm.
because the index we're looking for is, where are you? There you are. Table 17, race or of reference person,
Hmm.
annual average annual expenditure and characteristics 2020.
Hmm.
So, as you can see, all consumer units. This is the amount of money that white and all other races,
Mm-hmm.
white and all other races. That's a weird way to categorize it, but this is the way they've categorized it for the purposes of this table. And then they've broken out spending among Asian people and Black or African American people.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at the income before taxes here of white and all other races.
Mm-hmm.
Average 86,770. Black or African American 60,276.
Mm-hmm.
If we go down to annual expenditures overall, 63,227 for white and all other races, 67,306 for Asian people, Black or
Mm-hmm.
African American, 47,389. So, relatively speaking, we don't even spend as much overall on
Mm-hmm.
anything as white people do. But then,
Well,
no, go ahead.
well, of course, not having as much money makes it fairly obvious that you cannot spend as much.
Mhm.
The question is, you've got the common stereotype among Black folks is that we spend our money frivolously on
Mhm.
non-essential things.
Right.
Well, of course, that if you're spending your money on non-essential things, that means you're not spending money on essential things. That makes no sense. People spend what they have on essential things. If they have extra money, discretionary money, then they can spend it on other kinds of things. But we don't spend as much on alcohol or entertainment or invest fests or any other kinds of things as those who have more money. So there's no mystery to this, right? But the numbers make it very clear that those stereotypes are just stereotypes and they're false stereotypes.
And across the board, these numbers completely destroy every single one of those stereotypes. The
Hmm.
stereotypes that poor Black people spend all their money on, eating out. No, we don't. We spend uh, uh, more than less than half
Hmm.
almost of what white people spend, white and other races spend on
Hmm.
eating out. We clearly do not spend as much money, less than half, on alcohol. Um,
Hmm.
we spend, this is obviously troubling because we shouldn't be spending as much as white people on housing because we don't have as much money as they do to spend on housing. But
Hmm.
the amount of money that housing costs
Hmm.
and the additional poor Black tax that we get,
Right.
that causes this to be a problem. But this is not like, Black people are wilding out paying, renting luxury apartments. No, that is the cost of housing and how it reflects even on poor people.
Hmm.
And then, when you include shelter in general, all the different categories of shelter.
Hmm.
Um, this is another shocking category: utilities, fuels, and public services. White and all other races spend around $4,000 annually. Why do Black people who don't have as much money spend almost as much on utilities, fuels? Come on, that's where our money goes.
Well, I mean, utility prices are not subsidized
Mm-hmm.
for Black folks. Um, um, you know, uh, it, and so my utility bill is the same as pretty much anyone else's in Kansas City for the kilowatt hours that I use. I'm getting a subsidy for that. If I live in housing that is not as well insulated
Mm.
as housing that someone else is living in, then my utility bills are going to be higher both in winter and summer to keep me cool and warm and cool. And we know that because there are low income programs to insulate houses for the very poor to keep down their utility bills. And so if we live in housing that's not as, I mean, that's just an example of how it costs more to be poor. You know.
It does. And these are, all the other categories here. Transportation. It's ridiculous we're spending as much as we are on transportation, but again,
Mhm.
it's more costly for poor people. Healthcare,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, that makes no sense, but capitalism. Here's my favorite: entertainment. All this foolishness about black folks spending all that money on Beyonce tickets and blah blah blah. Have you been to a Beyonce concert? Have you been to a concert before the pandemic? It was not a stadium full of black people. It was
Mhm.
usually, and I don't care who the artist was, it was usually, if it was in a large arena, if it was a quote unquote A-list artist and the tickets were more than 150, $200, that stadium was full of mostly white people. We're not spending the kind of money that folks are always accusing us of spending on eating out, entertainment, not even getting our hair did, y'all. We're not even. Oh my gosh. But this is interesting. I found this to be interesting, and I
Mhm.
think this is where the faith part comes in, because who are we making cash contributions to? Well, most of us, that's the church,
Right.
right? But that's also charities and helping family members. And that's really amazing to me. And I'm not looking at that as a bad thing.
Mhm.
I look at that as just kind of the I think it is just the communal nature of oppressed people who still have some kind of indigenous cultural understanding that we are all we have.
Mhm.
Even if too many of us are still throwing our money away into some of these mega churches that honestly we need to occupy them joints. And I say this as a Christian. um, and these institutions are not taking that money and redistributing any of that to help the people. Too many of them are not, but still, I don't think this cash contributions thing is a bad thing. I think it does reflect a communal spirit that I think that if we stop listening to the invest fest class of people, this might be a point of organizing where we
Mhm.
can get in. Like I had a conversation with my family this past month when I went to my dad's and my dad for his birthday and our annual family day. And my dad is an elder in the Church of God in Christ, and his wife is, an evangelist, and they're wonderful people, and I love them, and they're, very strictly biblical, although my dad will wear shorts. And that's supposed to be like some no thing that men can't do in the Church of God in Christ. I never understood it. He never understood it. I remember one time he was like, "It's hot as hell down here. I ain't with I'm wearing some shorts." That's just
Right.
all there is to it. But we were able to have a conversation about the church taking care of the community.
Mhm.
If you're concerned about certain social issues because you are a Christian, then you're giving your money to these institutions, the churches, and the church is supposed to take those resources and redistribute them to the communities that give the resources, because that's the model that's in the Bible. That
Mhm.
literally is the way the early church operated,
Mhm.
totally in scripture. And I was able to have a conversation with these folks about redistribution of wealth and got some of them to realize, hey, guess what? Socialist principles are in the Bible. So if you believe those principles of redistribution of wealth in the Bible, then
Mhm.
this is what, at the very least, our
Mhm.
churches should be doing. And if we look at a couple of other examples, this also needs to be extended to the government,
Mhm.
because, Christ, that we believe in our faith, directly challenged political leadership that
Mhm.
exploited people. So I feel like this generosity that we see with the cash contributions, that I think is like a reflection of our kind of innate communalism.
Mhm.
that has been, yeah, it's been crushed mercilessly by capitalism and the desire to get the bag. But I think we can seize on that. And I don't know. Let me stop talking and editorializing, and let me let you have the floor about this table and your
Well,
thoughts.
well, I think you're right. I think there's a cultural communitarianism that we've not lost. There's I think the issue of whether or not our quote African communitarian roots were completely destroyed by slavery. I think that discussion is over. We've kept those things as part of our cultural apparatus. Part of the reason that black folks who are working don't have as much money to save is that they are also supporting members of their family who aren't working. And so our extension of our money out into church organizations and so forth is just a reflection of our faith. I mean, James Cone, author that who I admire quite. I'm not a Christian, but religion and understanding religion is a part of what I do as a social scientist. And I like James Cone's idea of religion being that religion is necessary, is a thing that helps us to fight against oppression, right? And when it's doing that, it's doing the best it should be doing, and we contribute to the church because the church is supposed to be outreaching to others who are poor and so forth and so on. That one of my colleagues, named Michael Hudson, I don't know if you've heard that name before, but he's a research professor at UMKC here, has been for a couple of decades. But he goes in his discussion of ancient ethics, morality. He argues that at one time all people, coming out of an African root. Now he didn't add that. I added that. But all people coming out of the African diaspora, 100,000 years ago and since, took an idea of communitarianism with them, and that whole idea as a general thing changed with the advent of the Roman Empire. Who and the Roman Empire kind of turned. Prior to the Roman Empire was the general idea that the rich had an obligation to take care of the poor, and the Romans turned that on their head. The rich were the poor had an obligation to take care of the rich. It was almost on his head. But African people have not lost that, and we did not lose that even through enslavement. Here, we still think it is a good thing to take care of the poor. It's a biblical principle because it's an ancient principle of ancient society and ancient civilization, and including African civilization. Capitalism is one of my teachers, and I say teachers, I mean teachers by reading. I'm an institutional economist, and so Thorstein Veblen, that name may be familiar to some. But he wrote about the contradiction between capitalism and Christianity. I mean, the Christianity in the doctrine is taking care of the poor and so forth. Christianity turns that on its head. There is a conflict between those two worldviews. And to the extent that the capitalism worldview in neoliberalism wants to take over the world, it is now confronting a different worldview from China, I think mainly, but that perhaps there is a different way for rulers to have a relationship with their subjects. And so this is a clash, and I'm not a Marxist at heart, but I think there's a lot to be learned from the Marxian analysis of capitalism. right? And of course, Marx never envisioned the kind of capitalism we have. Capitalism is worse now than Marx ever imagined.
Right.
you know,
Right.
and so we need financial capitalism is a beast, and persons who will get rich on the poor do not care whether the poor live or die.
Mm,
Right.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at
That's
least industrial capitalism, you had to make sure that your laborers didn't die.
I mean
Financially,
that's
you don't care about that.
yeah, that's wild that you can look back on the exploitation, the horrible working conditions of industrial capitalism, where like children were
Right.
put to work in factories,
Right.
and look back at that and go, well, at least they had to make sure that people lived so that they could work. And now,
Yeah.
as you said, these people don't care if we live or die. I know there's some confusion in the chat about which channel folks are supposed to be on. Just to let people know, I stream to all of the platforms that I have. So I stream on Luke Mon Nation on YouTube and Black Power Media on YouTube, and my Facebook page, Luke Mon Nation on Facebook and Twitter. My Twitter, Luke Mon Nation and Black Power Media Twitter. Why? Because this information needs to be accessible to everyone, because it is accessible information that will help us continue this struggle against this oppressive capitalist system. So I think probably most folks are in the chat on Black Power Media, and that's cool. If you're on Facebook or on Luke Mon Nation or YouTube, you won't see everybody's comments, so you might feel a
Mm.
little lonely, and that's cool. But we can see all of your comments, and we really, really appreciate them. So, Dr. Tauheed, I don't know. I am feeling weirdly optimistic and pessimistic
Mm.
at the same time.
Nice.
Like the next, you mentioned the next 10 years, the next 5 years, and the next 10 years. Um, I am pessimistic about obviously the next election. As a matter of fact, I am convinced that the Democrats will lose Congress, and
Hmm.
exactly in the midterms, and exactly what you said will happen,
Hmm.
that Joe Biden will be a lame duck president for 2 years, and
Hmm.
a Republican will be elected in 2024. And it may not be Trump, but it's not going to matter. And we're going to, all of the people who sat on the sidelines of this struggle up until this point will now want to get involved in this struggle, but they're going to want to get involved from a very liberal perspective,
Hmm.
bringing back the kinds of liberal Democratic Biden like policies that they think are better than the fascism that will be overtly on display, because it's not as if this country has not always been fascist. It has been. It just has not affected everyone until the way I think it will affect everyone.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Certainly after 2020, the midterms in 2020, this year in November, and
Hmm.
definitely after 2024.
Yeah.
So that's my pessimism.
Hmm.
And I think that for a lot of people, they're terrified of that. But I'm not afraid of that moment. I'm just pessimistic about it, because I realize that there's going to be a lot of political activity that it's going to be very liberal and completely useless,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, I agree.
And all it's going to be about is just like the anti-Trump movement, a vote for anybody who is not Trump, as a
Hmm.
or who is not the fascist, the overt fascist in charge, to elect somebody that they think is not an overt fascist, right? Which
Hmm.
is going to get us another liberal neocon Democrat. So that's what I think about that situation, and keeping in mind that the economic situation for working class, poor, and oppressed people will get worse in that time,
Hmm.
as well as the attacks on communities, individual people, civil liberties, what little bit we have left, all of that.
Hmm.
So I know that is going to happen. So I'm not diminishing that, but I'm also not fearful of it. because, and I think this is where the optimism comes in, because I know that that is almost necessary for this revolution that we keep saying
Mhm.
that we want, that we hope that will happen, that I know that we've been working toward. And that's where my optimism is, I think.
Yeah.
Um, because I'm not sure that the country can get lower than where it's going to go after 2024. Of course, it always could, but I think it's going to be low enough and terrifying and painful enough for us to be able to truly capture the attention of people who have been ignoring
Mhm.
these conversations about the need for revolution, for redistribution of wealth, for affordable housing, for free education, for universal health care, for socialism, for
Mhm.
third parties, and that kind of thing. What are you? How are you feeling about the
Yeah.
future?
Yeah, I think I have the same mix of optimism and pessimism. I think a lame duck Joe Biden is probably better than a compromising Joe Biden. That is, I think if Republicans will win the House and the Senate, I think that's going to happen. If Joe Biden just becomes an obstruction, doesn't sign legislation that's passed in those two entities and just vetoes it, that makes him a lame duck. But I think that is the best option. But I don't think that's who Joe Biden is. I think Joe Biden will sign whatever the Republican House and Senate passes. And so I think that scenario is actually a worse scenario than having a lame duck.
Mm,
So that's an amount of pessimism, if you will. Dr. John Henry Clark was asked about black unity. I think this applies to unity in general. He says, why aren't black folks more unified? And his response was, we haven't suffered enough. And I think that is very optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. I think that sentiment is, we're not as low as we can get, but this system is through many means, internal and external. We are being driven to that point. I mean, there are protests around the world, South America, countries in South America, Africa, Asia, and Europe, on the current economic situation. It kind of focused on inflation, but that's not going to be the end of it. And there's a struggle in many of these places with the fascists and the anti-fascists, and who wins in the end is I think it's up for grabs. But I think that's the only way that we're going to be able to eventually address our existential problems like climate change, like growing inequality, like famine. And we have the ability, I mean, technical ability to feed, clothe, and shelter every person on earth. We're about to reach 8 billion people. Sounds like a lot. I guess it is a lot of people, but technologically there is an ability to feed, clothe, and shelter all 8 billion of those people.
mm,
But of course, more than half of them are living on less than subsistence and living in famine. And it is a distribution issue that has to be resolved. The persons that we look at. My looking at the Biden administration. Is what's the old boss same as the new boss same as the old boss. Doesn't make any difference whether it's Republicans or Democrats. It is the wealthy who control the politics, and Democrats and Republicans are going to do whatever their donors want them to do. The Democrats are just going to just have a different rhetoric, but they end up doing the same thing. And
Dr.
I think and I think the public is becoming more and more aware of that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Dr. Tawhid, I want to thank you so much for spending another fantastic Friday with us, talking economics, Blackonomically speaking. And I want people to keep in mind and take from every conversation we have, whether it's about economics, whether it's about pop culture, whether it's about politics. Keep this in mind when whatever comes does come.
Mm.
Oppression, resistance breeds oppression,
Right.
but
Oppression
oppression
breeds
breeds
resistance.
resistance.
Right. Exactly.
It is a cycle that can't really be broken unless there is equality for all.
Yeah.
And we need to keep in mind that with every successful revolution around the world, we just talked about the Sandinista revolution, we talk about Cuba all the time, we talk about Venezuela. Every successful revolution over capitalism in China, there's always, to this day, a need to continue the struggle to defend that revolution.
Mm.
So, whatever we win on the other side of whatever is to come, don't think that we can rest on our laurels and relax, because capitalism will not go down without a fight. That's why we need to keep fighting. We want to thank Dr. Tawhid so much for giving us some more tools to fight this battle. Thank you so much, Dr. Tawhid.
I always enjoy being here in this discussion. You ask and frame the questions and the situation extremely well. And your listeners, viewers, I guess the viewers, right, are intelligent and ask very always ask good questions. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
We thank you all so much for watching. Appreciate you and all of your support. As always, be really good to yourselves and each other. A luta continua, the struggle continues, but Victoria acerta, victory is certain, and it is. Peace, y'all.